So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson to order. And I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation of Dr. Randy Friese, running for Congressional District 2, most recently a member of the Arizona House from LD9. He's my own representative. So let's go ahead and get through the first business, which generally starts with Kathy Ramage-White, our second vice chair membership head, making a pitch for everybody who's here to join DGT. Kathy,
you betcha. You betcha. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're enjoying your time in a little bit cooler, though I am hating the humidity. I don't know about the rest of you, but this gives us a chance to get away from the humidity of temperatures and get into the good humidity of politics, right? Well, I'm always here on Mondays to encourage you to join if you haven't already done so. It's only $20 for the year, and there's really no downside to being a member. So we're missing our usual chair, Larry, because he's having his knees operated on today. So he couldn't be here, but we have another good chair, so that's good. That's all I have to say for today. And joining DGT, I've already talked to Dr. Friese about joining up, and he said, yep, he can afford it. So he's on to do it. Thanks, and back to our host. Thank you.
It's only $20 a year for the whole year. Now we can hear from Sandy Binion about upcoming programs at DGT. Is Sandy with us? I don't see Sandy. All right, well then I'll do it. So if you go to the dgt.org, which is our website, you will see all the scheduling for upcoming events. I believe next week, we have Katie Hobbs, who is currently our Secretary of State and going to be running for governor of their state of Arizona. I'm loading the DGT myself as we speak, so I can look at the schedule. And it seems to be a little bit slow, so I'm going to ask Christina Early to go ahead and interject with a reminder about drinking democratically. Christina, you want to make an announcement?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a good Monday. Just wanted to remind everybody.
Oh, you just got muted.
I'm sorry. I was trying to put the link for our Drinking Democratically Happy Hour. That's going to be on July 28th from 4 to 6 p.m. at Monterey Court on Miracle Mile. The registration link, if I can get this to go without muting myself.
Okay. Want me to put your dinner in there?
Please.
I don't know why I keep muting myself. Okay, so anyway, if you haven't joined us the last couple of months, we are joined together with no speaker. We just talk to each other about politics. I would like to suggest to folks that are going to come to go ahead and invite your representatives. I'd like to invite Dr. Friese to come by just free, open, democratically talking with all of us good folks at Miracle Mile. The registration link will be in the chat. Please register just so we can give the host an idea of how many people will be joining us. Then again, at Monterey Court at 6:30, they have music starting, and you can stay for dinner. I would suggest that you make reservations with Monterey Court directly, and that information is on the registration link. So thanks, everybody. Dr. Friese, I hope we'll see you there. Thanks.
All right, so I've loaded the events page for the dgt.org, which is our homepage. And Terry Goddard is going to be with us on August 2nd. He's a former Arizona Attorney General. We're going to have Pima County Tax Assessor Suzanne Druby on August 9th. And on August 16th, City Councilman Richard Fimbres will be joining us. And on August 23rd, we'll have a representative from Invest in Arizona Signature Campaign to talk about the citizens initiatives that they're working on. I believe that's all we have in the hopper right now. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Dr. Randy Friese. If you'd unmute yourself, please, Dr. Friese.
Michael, aren't we supposed to do announcements now?
Let's go ahead and spend as much time as we can with Dr. Friese. Dr. Friese is a trauma surgeon, a veteran officer, and an educator. He was elected in 2014 to the State House, defeating a GOP incumbent. He served on the House Appropriations and Health and Human Services committees, and I believe he did a stint in House leadership as the assistant leader, if I'm not mistaken. And he's currently running for CD2 to replace Ann Kirkpatrick, who's retiring. Welcome, Dr. Friese.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time. I know that everyone is quite familiar with the flat tax and the things that we just passed. Grateful for the Invest in Ed movement, and I have every confidence that they will get that on the ballot in November 2022. And then a little bit of time about some of the bills I got to the governor's desk this year. I got 3 bills to the governor's desk this year dealing with adult use marijuana industry. And then again, at the very end, focus a little bit on the campaign, and then of course take your questions. I want to leave as much time to take your questions as possible. So quickly again about the flat tax, the budget this year enacted a flat tax. It's going to happen in 2 phases. So the first year it'll be taking our quintile income tax, more of a where we are now, are more of a progressive income tax. The more you make, the more tax you pay in proportion of your income. It squeezes it down to the first year to 2. I think it's 2.9 and 2.5, and then a year after that, it'll be everyone pays 2.5% income tax. Again, very regressive way to tax our residents in the state. Arizona already heavily relies on sales tax for its revenue, which is also regressive. And then to have the same, everyone pay the same proportion of their salary is again very regressive. So people pay, people that make less money pay more, even though it's 2.5%. It's still more to their income than someone who's paying, or hits them harder than someone who has a larger income. The budget this year, as you know, took a long time, and the reason is they wouldn't work across the aisle with Democrats. If the Republican leadership had worked with us, I'm sure we could have negotiated and compromised on some tax cuts, as long as we saw some major investments in our schools, in access to healthcare, in infrastructure improvements, et cetera. That's what we were looking for as a caucus. So basically, the flat tax has. It was, if you remember, in 2016 when Governor Ducey first came into his first term, his goal was to eliminate the income tax within he anticipated having his 8 years, which he's had, and this is taking him closer to that, although he won't be able to achieve that, thankfully. And another goal of the flat tax was a workaround, and in fact, the Republican majority actually called it this, a workaround to invest in education, which is the surcharge. So basically, they enacted at the same time as a flat tax, enacted a cap on income tax revenue at 4%. So the most anyone will pay is 4.5% income tax on their in Arizona. So what that means is the Invest in Ed pots of money will still get their 3.5% surcharge on greater than $250 for a single person or greater than $500 for a married person. But then the general fund will be only getting 1% of that income tax, whereas they used to be getting 4.5%. If our current tax structure was kept in place. So in the current tax structure, those that are making that higher amount would pay 4.5% income tax on that income plus the surcharge over those 2 amounts. Now it'll be the surcharge will still go to the Invest in Ed pots of money, but then the general fund will only get 1%. So the general fund is being shorted, is what's happening. So that's how they're protecting it from any lawsuits or any statutory issues, because the voters did say the surcharge must be collected, and it still is. What's happening is the general fund is being shorted. That means that when we have another recession or income shortages, revenue shortages for the state, the general fund will be not able to cover our responsibilities, and things will need to be cut again. Another thing that passed this year with the budget was a sort of workaround for small businesses to avoid the surcharge and classify their income in a different way so that they won't be paying the surcharge. I think that bill has some problems, and it goes against the Invest in Ed, which passed at the ballot. So I think that we'll see some lawsuits with that one if that's also being put on the ballot with Invest in Ed. That would be a good thing, but I thought the Invest in Ed initiative was just holding or repealing or voting or saying no to the flat tax and the cap. So that's why it's important for the Invest in Ed movement to move forward. I have full confidence that the David Lujan's group can get those signatures in the 90 days that they have to get that enjoined and then on the ballot in 2022, where the voters can reject it, since it is very, very much a benefit for the very wealthy in the state. And I'd like to see our state be more responsible with our revenues, and then work together with the Republicans and Democrats working together to identify investments and tax cuts. The Republicans want to see some tax cuts and the Democrats want to see investments. If we work together, we can successfully do both, but they did not choose to work together and wanted to achieve everything they wanted. And they got it by buying off the holdouts that took so long to get the budget passed, right? Each one of those senators and representatives that were one of the last ones to sign on got some special little things in the budget that they then justified to their constituency to voting for the flat tax. One of the big reasons it took so long to pass is also the cities and towns were very opposed to the flat tax because it cut into their shared revenue that they get from the income, right? Individual cities and towns agreed, long ago not to have an income tax stream because they got shared revenue from the state collecting the income tax. Well, of course, if you decrease the state's revenues, then the shared revenues with the cities and towns go down. So what the cities and towns through the League of Cities and Towns was able to go neutral on the bill when the Republican majority agreed to increase the percentage of shared revenue. I think it's up to 21%, so that they'll not have such a decline in their revenue. Certain cities and towns really rely heavily on the shared income tax revenue with the state as their only or minimal revenue that they have. A little bit about moving on to a couple of the bills. I got 3 bills to the governor's desk this year, which is, as everyone recognizes, a very difficult task for a Democrat in Arizona. And they all had to deal with regulation and testing of products for the new adult use industry, as well as the medical marijuana industry, refining the testing program. Everyone realizes that medical marijuana has been around in Arizona for 10 years, 11 years now, and we really failed to address the testing, making sure the product's safe. A couple of years ago, we began that program and mandated that it start in November 2020. Well, also at the same time, the adult use was on the ballot and passed. So the testing had a crunch. We had difficult with volume and laboratories and things like that. So it needed some more attention and regulation. Was able to pass 2605 through the House and Senate with bipartisan support, which was making the testing program more robust and putting some more requirements on laboratories and dispensaries to make sure the products are safe and that users have information about the products available to them. And then another bill I passed about proficiency testing of the laboratories, making sure that the laboratories that are reporting their testing results to the dispensaries. So basically the users are customers of the dispensaries. And then the dispensaries will be customers of the laboratories, and the laboratories will then, the dispensaries will contract out to the laboratories to test their product to make sure that they're within standard on the herbicides and the metals and the different toxins and things. What the state needs to do then is make sure that the laboratories are reporting and properly reporting accurate results. So they will proficiency test the laboratories to make sure they're basically testing the testers. And this bill required that. Also, it allowed for unannounced inspections of medical marijuana dispensaries, Adult use dispensaries have unannounced inspections in the initiative that passed 2020. We're just bringing up medical marijuana to the same standard. And then we created a dual license so that if you have most medical marijuana dispensaries will become adult use dispensaries, and we just created a dual license so that the administrative paperwork is streamlined. That's what those three bills did. Very happy to have worked on that all session long. Great big stakeholder meetings with adult use marijuana consumers, laboratories, and dispensaries. It was really good to take part in that policymaking process. And surprisingly, I worked very well with Senator Nancy Bartow, a very conservative senator from the Phoenix area, who she and I were able to work together, get compromise with the stakeholders, and create some very meaningful legislation. And I'll just wrap up here real quick, just talk about the congressional race here in CD2. Ann Kirkpatrick announced her retirement in mid-March. I got into the race on March 25th. I am termed out in the House. I feel after my 4 terms in the House, I'm ready to move on to bring my skills as a legislator, a physician, clinical scientist, Navy veteran, and actually a teacher at the medical school to Congress. As a physician, I think I have a unique way of addressing problems and thinking. I work in a team in the ICU, in the operating room, always open to listening and making sure that the final product or the final solution, if you will, is multifaceted and comes at the problem from many different directions. Multifaceted solutions are more robust, absolutely. When you take into account more than one point of view, I think your solution is more robust and certainly more accepted widespread. As you know, there's a couple other people running, right? All of us legislators. I think my unique skills as a physician, a critical care physician, a veteran, and a teacher make me give me a unique viewpoint, particularly on healthcare delivery, access to healthcare, and particularly gun safety and responsible gun ownership, addressing the gun violence problem in this country that has actually gotten quite worse. I'll tell you my personal experience as a trauma surgeon at the hospital here in Tucson. In the past year, we have seen a drastic increase in interpersonal violence, particularly with guns and other piercing or penetrating mechanisms. Not only is it interpersonal violence, domestic violence, criminal violence, all of it is really increasing. I'd like to take my experience to Congress, bring my unique viewpoints and my skill set in working with people to accomplish things, and being open to listening to others and understanding when someone's idea improves my solution or makes it more broadly accepted, and working with someone to solve problems. I think that's the most important thing that Congress can do. We have a lack of that going on in Congress right now. There's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of partisanship. I coined a term, I call it the celebritician. A lot of people get elected now not to serve, not to be servant leaders, not to solve problems. They get elected to be celebrities and then raise money into a PAC or something. I want to bring us back to our goal of working together to solve problems for Americans and making life easier and allowing people to allow their children to have better lives. But I'm happy to take questions. I haven't been reading the chat, so I don't know what's going on there.
We'll take care of that for you, Dr. Friese.
All right.
Craig is monitoring the chat room. If there are any questions coming up there, he'll ask them for whoever asked them. Since I don't have any hands yet raised, I have a question or two of my own, I believe. Here somewhere. Where did I put them? Well, my first one is, we have hands up already. So I'm going to ask Mr. Bob Wallen, who seems to be the first one to pop up with a hand, to ask his question. Please unmute, sir.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Dr. Friese. I'd like to know if there are any legal strategies available to Democrats in the state legislature to halt the fraud going on in Maricopa County, and have Democrats approached the federal Justice Department for some assistance in intervening? And is that a possibility?
Okay, thank you, Bob. Let me take the second part first. Yes, Democrats have approached the Federal Justice Department. I believe Secretary Hobbs has written a letter to Merrick Garland requesting them to investigate both the fraud and look into whatever potential results that are being reported, and also how the audit is taking place. Are they infringing upon people's rights, civil rights, voting rights during this process? So yes, that request has been made. I talked with our House counsel and asked if adding our voice to that would be helpful. And she indicated that, it wouldn't hurt, but the request has already been made and it's in the hands of the Federal Justice Department. A request has also been made to Attorney General Brnovich here to consider investigating this process and particularly the proposal to go door to door in canvassing and asking people questions about the voting process they participate in. The first part of your question, Bob, is also very interesting. Is there something that Democrats could have done? I honestly think yes. I brought this up with some of my colleagues in the Senate. This all started in the Senate. Now, I just want to highlight with you, the senators never voted as a body to do the audit. What happened was the chairman, and I believe at the time it was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee from last legislature, Eddie Farnsworth, who decided that he was going to subpoena the Maricopa County supervisors. And then the new chairman, since Mr. Farnsworth did not run again, the new chairman of the committee, Senator Peterson, also took it upon himself to push this forward. The president of the Senate, President Fan, then with her authority as president and his authority, Mr. Peterson as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, they called the Maricopa County supervisors in to testify and present, give them the servers. What the Senate voted on was, the supervisors initially declined, and then the Senate voted on it. And that's the one vote they took. Of course, all Republicans voted yes, 16, all senators, Democratic senators voted no. And then with that vote, they subpoenaed them, and this sort of spawned every step of the audit from there. Now, the one thing that I believe the Senate as a body could have done, and I asked some of my Democratic senators to consider this, I said, please just make a motion on the floor to stop the audit. One senator could have made a motion, requested a roll call vote to stop the audit. That would have done two things. They would have either had a party line vote to continue the audit, and we would have had every single Republican on the record saying, I support this audit. Or two Republicans, and it would have taken two, could have voted with all the Democrats and stopped it. Well, that motion was never made. I wish they had done it, but it was never made. And now here we are deep into this thing that we are now not in session. So it's not possible for that motion to be made at, when we were in regular session, it could have been every day someone could have made that motion, or any day they could have, but it was not made. And we don't have the opportunity to do that now. So the audit would need to be ended by the president and Mr. Peterson. But unfortunately, they're making wild claims and getting things wrong. If you saw the Secretary of State's office, Garrett Archer, who used to work for the Secretary of State now, was very clear in the numbers that were disparate between the ballots sent out, the ballots brought in. He said, we stopped updating this list on the last day to request a ballot, and this list continues to be updated as they come in. So it was very clear that they either were being purposefully misleading and pointing at something that is not a problem, or they were incompetent and not understanding what they were doing. And both of those things are just unacceptable. So to answer your question, I suppose during session, the Senate could have tried to stop it by forcing a vote, but they didn't. And the initial process, the vote that was taken, was not about having an audit. It was about whether they should subpoena the supervisors.
I believe Susie was next with her hand up. Unmute yourself, please, Susie, and ask your question.
That was Steve Mizell. He's next up.
Oh, okay. In my order, I show you, but let's go to Steve then.
My question is about social issues, very simple. What is your position on a women's right to choose? And the second is the Equal Rights Amendment.
Oh, that was a great question, Steve, and very easy for me to respond. I fully, completely support ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment. My seatmate Pam Powers-Handley and Victoria Steele, as well as every single Democratic woman. Every year we try to we introduce the bill to send to the ballot the ratification of or send to the Secretary of State the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. It is never received a hearing. A few years ago, we were able to force it to the floor for a vote. Every single Democrat voted yes, and of course, every single Republican voted no. I think one year we might have had Michelle Ugenti-Rita vote yes on it because she knew she wasn't going to cause it to pass. Absolutely support the ERA and getting it as part of our Constitution. As far as a woman's right to choose and make her own healthcare decisions, I am a physician. We had a horrible bill this year passed out of the House that and Senate, I believe, and the governor signed it, that says that makes healthcare providers criminals, a felony, if they provide an abortion for genetic defect reasons. Terrible bill. I wrote an op-ed in the, I think it was in the Star or the Republic, I can't remember which. As a physician, this is reaching into the very sacred relationship between a doctor and a patient, a healthcare provider. Let me broaden it out: a healthcare provider and a patient. And if we start threatening providers with criminal penalty, the problem there is they may not offer patients all options, right? This is a decision that a woman makes with her intimate partners, their spouse, their close family members, and whoever they wish to invite into that circle. It's not a decision for the state to make. So I strongly support and have been very public with my support of a woman to make her own healthcare decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Friese. Susie, you're up next. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, no, it's Lillian and then Steve.
Oh, okay. Seems that you're at the head of the queue for me, but I will go with you. Please open your microphone, Lillian, and ask your question.
Yeah, Dr. Friese, you mentioned that you want to make a difference for gun safety nationally. Could you give some specific examples of what you'd like to accomplish? And then what else do you want to accomplish nationally? Lillian,
thank you so much. Okay, so we'll start with gun safety. I have introduced gun safety bills here in Arizona every single year that I've been in the legislature, from broad solutions like a comprehensive system of background checks for every single gun purchase. Basically, requiring that every purchase go through the NICS system, the National Instant Background Check System. Federally licensed gun dealers have access to that system, and it doesn't do it adds simply minutes to the potential sale, unless of course you are a prohibited possessor, or it potentially could possibly slow the sale down until that is sorted out. Other things I've introduced: safe storage. If you're a parent and you have a gun in your home and it is not safely stored, and a child gets access to it and injures themselves or someone else, you are held accountable. I can tell you, I've taken care of children who come to the hospital because they were at their neighbor's home and there was a gun on the coffee table and they were curious and they pulled it down and injured themselves or someone else. We have done this year, and I want to be encouraged. I'm going to talk about this bill and then I'll talk about what I can do federally, or what I hope to do federally. But I want to encourage everyone. This year, I actually got a gun safety bill to the floor of the House for a vote. When I first started in the legislature, we were still passing gun everywhere bills, is what I would call them, where it was saying that you could carry your gun concealed into any building, and it would be up to the building's steward to require metal detectors and provide safe storage, etc. We were still passing those bills, and then when Parkland happened a few years ago, that expanding sphere of gun everywhere bills actually stopped expanding. We haven't moved into the contraction and more gun safety legislation yet, But I think the fact that that expansion of that universe stopped is a good sign. So the bill I wrote this year took me 18 months, but I got the NRA and the Arizona Citizens Defense League, which is even more powerful than the NRA in Arizona, neutral on my bill. And basically my bill said, if you have a concealed carry permit and you become a prohibited possessor, you're convicted and sentenced. This is how your concealed carry weapons permit is to be seized. Right now, the statutes say it's to be seized, but no one is seizing. No one is doing it. Everyone else pointing the finger. It's not my job. It's their job. It's their job. It's their job. So basically, I just created a bill and said the courts will take it at sentencing, or the courts will, or the probation officer will take it, when the person's in probation, or the person can surrender it themselves, or the person can say, I no longer have it in possession of it on an affidavit, just to give the courts an option to direction on how to do this. Like I said, I got the NRA and the CDL neutral on this bill. I got it out of a Republican majority committee, but the speaker came up to me and said, I can't put this up for a vote. Too many members are uncomfortable. And I said, Mr. Speaker, we didn't come here to be comfortable with every vote that we take. But to me, that's progress. That's progress. Nationally, Lillian, what I would like to do nationally is I would like to start out very broadly and incentivize states to do the right thing. Now, what I'm talking about is, let's think about in the 1970s, when we incentivized states to require seatbelts. How did we do that? We tied the requirement to their highway money. And this is what happened in the 70s. This is how the seatbelt laws came about in every state. If you did not have a seatbelt law, you didn't get your highway money. Now, that changed over time because that requirement went away. The federal government withdrew that requirement. So some states dropped away from it, and the motorcycle helmet's another example. But I'd like to have an idea like that. Let's say if you have a comprehensive system of background checks for every gun purchase in your state, you get $500 million more for public safety. And if you don't get the extra money. So incentivize states to do the right thing to keep people safe. That would be one of the places I start. Another place would be to make sure that we allow the federal government. I think the Dickey Amendment has been repealed, the amendment that says that government cannot fund research on gun safety and gun violence. I think we need to make very clear that we want that research done. And instead of repealing an amendment, maybe writing a bill that creates grants that incentivizes research on gun safety, things like that. But I think looking at incentivizing the behavior that we want the states to do by tying it to money. Unfortunately, money talks.
Mike, you're muted.
Thanks, Steve. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Steve, and ask your question, please.
Real quick, let me just add, I think she asked other priorities. Let me just say other priorities, access to healthcare. I will support anything that improves and broadens access to quality healthcare for Americans. That includes Medicare for all. That includes a public option. That includes dropping the age of Medicare. Anything that expands access, I would support. Of course, climate, protecting the climate. I'm a scientist. I am a clinical scientist. Not only am I a physician, I have a master's of clinical sciences. I understand scientific method. I can help other people understand, what it means to logically, linearly think and move toward a conclusion. So I would absolutely support the environment, help people understand and believe that climate change exists. And I've always been a great big supporter of public education.
Thank you, Dr. Friese. Steve, what's your question, please?
Okay, it's been my pleasure and very much to have supported you, Randy, in every election that you've run in so far. And just pragmatically talking about getting you elected, we don't even know what number the congressional district is going to have. I just want to know if you had any early indication from the redistricting committee or anything about the appearance of the district and whether or not they're going to try to make it more competitive by adding more Republican areas, or what have you heard about how the district that you're going to be running in will look like, I mean, even at this early stage?
Thanks, Steve. I think that's a great question. In 2022, we have the nuance of redistricting. What I do know is the CD2 used to be CD8, right, 10 years ago before it switched to CD2. And this district is up against the international border to the south and the New Mexico border right to the east. If you look at the geographic shape of this district, it really hasn't changed a lot since the 80s, just because of those two constraints. Now, Arizona grew in its population in the last decade. Good thing. Where did the growth happen? Not here in southern Arizona. It happened in Pinal and Maricopa, that sort of southern Maricopa, northern Pinal area. So that's where the growth is. So CD2 actually has to pick up 60 to 70,000 voters. And that shifting will have to happen, you know, of reshaping CD1 where O'Halloran is and maybe CD9 where Stanton is. So what options does CD2 have for the commission to consider? Well, CD2 can grow to the west and then pick up Santa Cruz County from CD3, which is now Raul's district, Mr. Grijalva. And if it does that, the district becomes bluer. Or the district can grow to the north, right, into Pinal County, if it's the northwest, or Greenlee County, if it's the northeast, and of course the district then becomes redder. But the district over the past decade, and I'm sure you're all aware, has become more democratic. It started when Gabby had it at the end of the 2000s, and when she got reelected in 2010, right before the shooting, a very evenly split district with 33 Democrat, 33 Republican, 33 Independent. Now it's more like 38, 39 Democrat, you know, a little bit, and then the Republican independents are close to each other. And Ann and Biden both won by about 10 points in 2020. So I see the district. I mean, the district could possibly get bluer if the Republican, if the commission wants to create another sort of Democratic district, or it could get redder. But I don't see it flipping all the way to the red side. It might get a little bit more competitive, but I don't see it flipping to like super Republican without a lot of contortions in the map. Let's say.
All right, Susie, finally your turn.
Thank you, Michael. Randy, it's so good to see you, and hello to Susan too.
Oh, certainly.
She's well. What I would like to know is about water in the West. Everything is beautiful right now around Tucson with the rains that we have gotten. But news coming from Utah is dismal because of snowpack. I mean, and we rely on that snowpack in Arizona for our water. The Great Salt Lake is drying up, and that allows the salt flats, which have natural arsenic in them, to become dustier and blow those poisonous, toxic dusts over populated area. When you're in Congress, okay, do you foresee being able to work on a plan to bring many people? I mean, we all in our states, want, good things to happen for us. And we're not used to working. Well, here in the West, we do better working with other states, but still, what do you foresee as how to work with, a group of people when California has such a large population and they love to take it? We're in drought situations, and, it just gets worse. Anyway.
I think you bring up a great point, Susie. Water is not only important for Arizona, it's hyper important for Arizona because we live in a dry climate, in a desert climate, but it's also important for the entire country. And I think as a scientist, understanding scientific method, understanding being able to think linearly, I can help people understand that you may not think this is a problem for you, but it's going to accelerate in the future. if we don't pay attention to it now. Same for climate change, right? We should have been paying attention to these problems decades ago, and we turned our back on them. That is not responsible for future generations, right? So I think it's important for someone to get together with other scientists in Congress, because there are a few. One of the scientists that's in Congress now is Dr. Bill Foster. He's a physicist from Illinois. He's been in Congress for, I think, just under a decade or so. He's endorsed my campaign because he wants more like-minded scientists to be able to come together and influence the body with our ability to understand scientific method and hopefully, understand reading a paper, dissecting a paper, what are their conclusions and should we believe them? There used to be a committee for Congress that were scientific experts, and that was dissolved, I want to say 10 years or more ago. Might have been under Bush, quite some time ago. But I think something like that needs to come back. So I think my role in water and environment is helping people understand the science behind it and how it's real, and the urgency to address it. One of the things that we did here recently in the legislature was, of course, renegotiated our drought contingency plan. You bring up other states, Lake Mead. I mean, I've seen pictures of Lake Mead. It is astounding and shocking. So we negotiated a plan that, again, California is at the top of the line and is protected from cuts when our reservoir hits that magic 1076 or 75 number. We at Arizona I've always found it kind of odd. Our state is almost entirely in the Colorado River Basin, but we take the deepest cuts as a state when that happens. So we did renegotiate that a few years ago, and California will take deeper cuts. But one of the things the Democratic caucus was able to do, and this is one of the few times I hold up as a shining example, 2 times in my 7 years in the legislature where we actually negotiated with the majority, and it was through the governor's office, not through the Republican-led legislative majority. It was with water and DCP, and it was with the opioid crisis. And the legislation that came out about that. The governor's office reached out to us, and I was in leadership at this time. I was assistant leader for 4 years. And he reached out and said, the governor's office said, what would you like to see in this DCP plan that would help your caucus embrace it? And we said, more money for conservation, more money to figure out how we can use water more wisely, more efficiently. Right? Everybody understands that agriculture takes a lot more water than residential. We have crops that use a lot of water, alfalfa, and then shipped out of the state and out of the country even. That's basically taking our water and sending it to another country. So we emphasize the importance behind the science of understanding how to use water more efficiently. And we got it. We got the governor to give us a committee to look at that and money. So we all embraced the drought contingency plan. The same thing happened for opioids. They reached out and we asked for more money for people who didn't have health insurance or were underinsured to have access to medication-assisted treatment for their addiction, and we got it. So it can happen. It just, when working together and getting bipartisan solutions can happen, it just happens too infrequently here. And water, Susie, is one example of when it happened a few years ago.
I'd like to ask Jana Siegel to unmute herself and ask her a question. She's asked to speak in the chat.
Hi, Dr. Friese. This is Jana Siegel. I've spoken to you before. I represent Sustainable Tucson, particularly on water issues, actually. And I attended Tucson Water's One Water recommendations. And I want to dig a little deeper into the water issues. So you said that there was bipartisan collaboration on the water, but recently there was some weak water quality program that was signed by the governor, HB 2691, and there's some pretty bad stuff there. It includes no more stringent than federal regulations, and right now those are really bad. So if you're elected, I hope that, that you make really strong regulations on our clean water. And it also excludes outstanding Arizona waters as protected by AZ waters. And it excludes waters that aren't perennial, non-perennial waters. And that's a big problem in Tucson, because we actually use our dry riverbeds to sink in our water for our aquifer, and we use that water to drink. So I don't know if there's anything you can still do in the state legislature about that, but if you could work on that, if you're elected.
Thank you.
Also, there's the active management area. Beyond the active management areas, that people are allowed to pump as much water as they want to, and the big farms, and you hinted at this, other countries coming in and putting their big farms in here and sucking out our water, and the small farms aren't even, don't have any water, and the people are going out of business or not even having water for their own families. So to also, to change that it's, that those rural areas do have limits on the amount of water that they use, and that you can't just sell your water to anybody, even foreign countries.
You bring up some great issues, Jana, and I didn't mean to imply that just because we came together once that everything was rosy. It's certainly not. And you highlight some of the bad water policy that is still coming out of this legislature and being enacted in Arizona. I guess what I'd like to highlight is, some of the things that have been proposed in this state. Let me just say federally, a lot of the water changes are happening at the executive level, right? The waters of the US, and President Obama put in, and then Trump repealed, and now we've got to work to get them back in. What Congress needs to do is to put them into statute, so that each president doesn't get to erase or start again or change, right? We need to have a baseline of how we're going to regulate water across this country, right? We have, the ephemeral streams we have here in Tucson, sometimes they're flowing, sometimes they're not. And we need to make sure that those waters are also protected. And that's one of the things that Waters of the US did when Obama was in, and then Trump took away. And then of course, Mr. Biden is bringing back. So I think federally, we need to enshrine that in legislation, right? Create the baseline, the floor of what water we're protecting. And it needs to be robust as possible. In Arizona, you mentioned the AMAs, the active management areas. There's 5 of them. And you're absolutely right. Outside of those active management areas, we have no idea how much water is being pumped out of the ground. We have surface water and we have groundwater, right? We have surface water coming from the Colorado River that actually comes down to Tucson through the aqueduct system. And Tucson is very smartly recharging our groundwater with it. We're recharging groundwater with some other water that is currently not drinkable, but using, as Jenna mentioned, using the aquifer to clear it as it percolates through and become drinkable water again. So there's a lot of different solutions. But yes, metering groundwater use outside of the active management areas, extremely important. We've talked about it. There was actually a Republican introducing bills to do it, but the majority wouldn't allow it to move forward. Even when we proposed it and wanted to vote yes on it, she wouldn't join us because of the pressure that she got from her colleagues. It's really remarkable that someone who supports an idea will vote against their own idea because of the pressure of the majority. Irrigation non-expansion areas is another thing that Arizona has. There's only 2 of them. We need to be able to create more of those AMAs and INAs. The same legislator had a bill to make it easier to create more of them. And again, the pressure from the majority, they did not move forward. And lastly, I'll say the Harquahala aquifer is another groundwater source that is not yet tapped or overly tapped. And just a few years ago, we almost sold the rights to build those aqueducts to private companies to pump that water out of the ground and send it down to Phoenix. Can you imagine what a private company would charge for water if we allowed that to happen? So I was staunchly against any private money to do that. And I said, if we need to tap that water, it needs to be public money. so that we aren't at the mercy of a private company's crisis when we desperately need water. So you're absolutely right. I think at the federal level, we need to be creating legislation to protect the waters of the US and not just depend on each executive through executive action to do the right thing.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. I also want to suggest that you work on like we need to conserve water here with rainwater harvesting and green infrastructure and incentivize that more. We're not doing that enough here in Tucson. And before we go and try to, put a pipeline that will go all the way across the country to bring us water from someplace else.
Yeah. And that was entertained. I think we funded it with $200 million. But you're right, incentivize what you want. Just like I said with gun safety, we should incentivize what we want the states to do to conserve more water. We need to conserve water, use it more efficiently and effectively, and make sure we're protecting our streams and rivers.
And one last thing about that, also protecting our water by not allowing the mines to pollute it, like the Rosemont mine, and repealing the 1876 mining law that makes mining the best use of all our water and everything, and doesn't limit them.
Thank you, Jennifer, for bringing that up. I've already looked at that law. Right now, the name of it is slipping my head, but I've talked to many environmental experts who also recommend repealing that law.
All right. Dr. Friese, I have a question that's been pending in the chat room for a while. Yeah. Meg Prudelt wonders if you'll be filling out your state legislative term. I imagine that answer is yes. And also, she says, you have an extensive record of filing gun safety legislation, much appreciated by many, including herself. How will you defend those bills to gun owners and rural voters who may be propagandized to see you as a gun grabber?
I will take the second piece of that first. Thank you, Meg, for your encouragement and your ideas. You've been a real help to me in my time in the legislature when it comes to gun safety. Basically, I will use a logic and I believe the majority of Americans, I believe the majority of Republicans, I believe the majority of National Rifle Association members want their policymakers to begin to address this problem. I think the NRA is losing its influence, which is a good thing. I think we need more people like me. And I know there are some other gun survivors, people that have had family members taken by gun violence elected to Congress. We need to be able to have these discussions and demonstrate and build trust across the aisle that we're talking about gun safety and responsible gun ownership. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about taking anyone's gun away who is safe with it and has demonstrated that they are safe and will be safe and has a right to own that weapon. If you are a prohibited possessor, then you should not have easy access to weapons. That's what we're talking about. I think that as the NRA loses its influence and we begin to have more discussions and people see the ideas we're putting forward are about making it safe and making people responsible, I think that people will become more comfortable with it. It's going to be a long road, but it's a process that requires trust. In order to build trust, one must begin small. And I know some people don't care for incrementalism. I don't call this incrementalism. I call this problem solving and solutions. Sometimes a solution is best built when it builds upon itself, and each little facet is not cumulative, but it is exponential. Each piece adds more than the sum of the others. That's the way I will be dealing with it. Now, as far as will I be resigning from office, that is something that I'm seriously considering right now, and I'll say it quite frankly, I'm leaning toward yes. I need to give this campaign the attention it requires. And let me tell you, I don't enjoy having 3 jobs. This past session, I had 3 jobs and I did not enjoy it. And I don't intend to have 3 jobs again.
Thanks, Doctor. Steve Meisel has his hand up. Would you please unmute yourself, sir, and ask your question?
Yeah, I'd like to double back, if we can, to the water issue, because it affects quality of life, it affects real estate values, the future of business in the Southwest, not just Arizona. And I think regulation and conservation, that's great, but I'm going to depart from the previous comment that was made regarding the pipeline, because I think climate change is only going to accelerate. I think droughts are going to accelerate. Just regulation and conservation of what we have and what is dwindling is one thing. We have to find a new source, and it's sitting out in the Pacific Ocean. And the Israelis and the Saudis get most of their water through desalination. We've had pipelines from Alberta down to the Gulf of Mexico for oil. Water's the new oil. I'd like to know what your position is going to be. You go to Congress regarding being someone fighting for a pipeline desalination so that we have a constant, unending amount of water coming to our homes.
Well, I think desalination is absolutely an option, but remember the energy required, right? Reverse osmosis takes a lot of energy to push that water through that filter and get those solutes out. So that, I mean, I want to incentivize the scientists to figure out how we can do that better. Yes, there's a lot of water in the oceans. There's a lot of water that we can try to create fresh water out of, but let's not forget the importance of conservation and using the water we have more efficiently. We have a desalination plant here in Arizona over by Yuma somewhere. I can't remember something. I can't remember exactly where. It's not being utilized because of the cost of supplying the energy needed for reverse osmosis. So yeah, let's use it. Let's absolutely use it. Let's make sure that we're looking at the science to make it less energy costly. How else can we generate energy? I think the oceans are another, the tidal changes are another source of energy right there. We need to figure out how to capture the energy of the tides. Boy, there's so much energy there. And I think I would what does a government do best? It incentivizes our good thinkers, right? And sometimes that money is not going to result in a solution. A lot of times it's going to result in something good. So I would, again, create grants, support science with grants and the NIH, and not be so quick to cut that funding. Not only does it help healthcare, it helps, energy supply, it helps infrastructure, it helps so many things. So let's make sure that we're incentivizing the thinkers to create solutions. And one of them might be somehow harvest the energy of the tides so that we can spend it on the reverse osmosis to create fresh water. But yes, absolutely, reverse osmosis is a way to create water, but right now it's quite costly in its amount of energy required.
Thank you, Dr. Friese. I actually have my hand up. I have a question of my own that I'd like to ask. I'd like to hear your thoughts and insight into the rising tide of political violence, incivility, misinformation in our democracy and the threats to it, and how you feel that you would be able to help that situation.
Yeah, we've gotten ourselves into a bad place. Mike, I can't, I just don't think that the policymakers are talking to each other enough. I think they're living in their own spheres, and the top-down leadership, right, is what we're seeing. And that's what we have here. We've had here in the Arizona legislature for several decades is the top-down leadership. And we have rare examples of when it breaks. One example here in Arizona is when we were able to pass the referral to the ballot to repeal parts of Proposition 300 regarding the out-of-state tuition costs for Dreamers, right? That's going to be on the ballot. We're going to repeal that piece of Prop 300. At least the voters will ask that question. And that happened because a few Republicans broke with their leadership. We're not seeing that enough. Government is about coalition building, and the coalitions vary depending upon the issue. And there should be bipartisan coalitions on most of what we do. And most of what we do is bipartisan, really. When you look at a lot of bills, we're voting 60 or 58, on most of what we do. But when we get to the issues that divide us, they clearly divide us, and there shouldn't be that level of division, right? And I think what we need to do is start with the small projects, work with each other, build trust. Now, don't get me wrong. I absolutely know there will be people I cannot work with at all. That doesn't mean I won't talk to them or try, but I won't waste time. You know, there are people there that are willing to work across the aisle, and I have to also be willing to give my vote to a Republican idea if I can change it. And the examples I gave in the legislature were the water and the opioids. So we didn't get a whole lot, right? We did not get a whole lot, but we got something that the governor didn't want to do at the beginning. And that was refreshing and different. So we said, yes, we'll support this. We were used to being told, no, you won't get anything, and we're going to make it difficult for you to vote no, right? The president of the Senate told me personally, another thing I worked on this session was unemployment insurance reform. I worked across the aisle with Mr. Cook, and we put together a bill that passed out of the House with over 50 votes that increased the amount of the weekly benefit on unemployment insurance. The Senate president didn't want to do it this year. She wanted to do it next year in the election year, but she saw the results we had. She jumped on board, created her own bill. It was smoke and mirrors. I told her that. She told me, I'm going to put it in the budget and watch you vote no. That's what happened. But guess what? It passed, right? I voted no because I couldn't vote for the budget, but it still passed. We still got unemployment insurance reform. So that's the politics of it. We really need, like, I really enjoy the policy and the problem solving. The politics are not my most enjoyable thing or my strong point, but I'm willing to work with people to get things done. And I absolutely know who I will not be able to work with and won't waste time. I absolutely know when I need to vote no because they didn't give me anything, because my compromise was not understood or taken, or my idea was not. So you just have to know, when is it enough to vote yes? Did you give me enough? So, and that's the politics of it.
Your very insightful answers to our questions. I'd like to invite you to help us help you. How can we get a hold of you? How can we help your campaign?
Oh, thank you, Michael. So I have a website, Dr. Friese for Arizona. That's DrFriese Arizona spelled out.com. That's my website. We are populating the website with policy pages as we move forward in the campaign. We still have a year to go, so the website will become more robust as we get closer. I think Shane just put it in the chat. There's also a link to the Act Blue on that page if you'd like to help with the donation. I'm open to communicating. My email is randy@drfrieseforarizona.com. Just email me directly. If you have a general question, you can email info@drfrieseforarizona.com. Happy to take your questions. I really appreciate your invitation to speak to you today, and I'll be getting my membership application in the mail.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at Democrats of Greater Tucson. It's now 1 o'clock. We're going to sign off.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.